In 1852, on the outskirts of Marbury County, Alabama, a man named Silas Wren lived alone for 14 years. No children, no wife, no visitors, just the hollow echo of footsteps that were not always his own. They say that when Silas finally rode into town again, he bought 7 enslaved women, paid in gold coins, freshly minted, though no one knew from where. By morning he was gone. By the year's end, 6 of those women were dead. But the seventh, they say, became his wife. And when she began to speak in her sleep, the townsfolk claimed they heard 2 voices in her throat, one human and one that had no right to sound human at all. This is not a love story. It is the account of an infection, of a soul that learned to feed on silence. And the records that remain, parish letters, asylum reports, the sheriff's confession, were meant to stay buried. Tonight we exhume them. Silas Wren's plantation stood 12 miles beyond the last marked road. Locals called it Hollow Acre, a name whispered with discomfort, as if saying it too loud would stir something listening underground. He inherited the land from his father, a man rumored to have dug for silver and found only bones. The soil there was darker than anywhere in Alabama, damp even in drought, and things buried in it never truly stayed down. For 14 years, Silas lived in the great house alone. The servants who had once worked the fields vanished after his father's death. No one ever saw Silas bury them, yet no one saw them leave either. The shutters of the house never opened, and the chimney smoked only at night. Neighbors described him as polite but distant. A man of learning, they said, though no one knew what he studied. A few claimed to have glimpsed candlelight flickering in the upper windows at odd hours, shifting as if someone walked behind the flame. Then came the winter of 1852. Silas rode into town with a list, 7 names written in his own hand. 7 women, all enslaved, purchased from different counties. He said he needed them to restore the estate. He signed the papers with a trembling hand and left before dawn. Days later, one of the traders told a curious detail. When Silas spoke, his voice had a strange echo, as though someone else repeated his words a fraction of a second later. The trader swore he was alone in the room, yet he heard it clearly. 7 souls for 7 debts unpaid. They came by wagon at dusk. 7 women bound together by rope and silence. The driver claimed the road bent longer than it should, as though the land stretched itself to delay their arrival. When they reached Hollow Acre, the air was colder, heavy with a damp smell like open graves. Silas stood at the door waiting, dressed in black despite the summer heat. He said nothing as the women were led inside. His eyes lingered on each face, not with desire, but with study, as if comparing them to something unseen. The house was vast and rotting. Floorboards sank underfoot. In the halls hung portraits so old the faces had blurred into stains. The women were sent to different rooms, though none could find a window that opened. At night, the wind pressed against the walls like breath. The youngest of them, Eliza, awoke to scratching behind her bed. When she looked, there was no rat, no hole, only the faint outline of a hand pressed from the other side of the wall. It stayed there until dawn. By the 3rd night, 2 of the women had vanished. Silas said they'd gone back north. Though none remembered hearing horses or wheels, their beds were still warm. Eliza began to count the footsteps in the hallway, always 7 pairs. Even after 2 were gone, she still heard 7. Then, one morning, Silas appeared in the dining hall with a strange calm. He told the remaining 5, "You are safe now. The first 2 have served." When Eliza asked what he meant, he smiled faintly and said, "Every house needs a foundation. Ours just needed to remember what it was built on." That night, the walls began to bleed a thin, rust-colored water. Eliza first heard it when she went to fetch water. The pump had long gone dry, but Silas insisted the well beneath the cellar still ran clear. She carried a lantern down the narrow stairs, her bare feet slipping on stones slick with moisture. The air grew colder the deeper she went. The smell was sharp, like iron and wet soil. When the lantern's light touched the lowest step, she saw that the cellar walls were covered in carvings, circles within circles, names scratched in with fingernails, and symbols that pulsed faintly as if breathing. Then came the whisper. First she thought it was water. A trickle, then a murmur. But the words became clearer. A woman's voice, pleading from beneath the floorboards. Help me. He buried me wrong. Eliza froze. The voice shifted, closer now, threading itself around her breath. He said we'd sleep. But the ground moves. It moves, Eliza. She dropped the lantern, and in the brief flash before it went dark, she saw a shape pressed against the dirt. The outline of a face, eyes open, lips still moving beneath the earth. When she told Silas what she'd heard, his calm did not falter. He simply asked, "Did she call you by name?" Eliza nodded. Silas sighed, almost tenderly. "Then she's chosen you." That night he locked the cellar door. From her room, Eliza could still hear the whisper, faint but relentless. A breath that crawled up through the floorboards and spoke without pause. By morning, the whisper was inside her dreams. And when she awoke, there was soil beneath her fingernails. 3 days after the cellar whisper, Eliza awoke with a mark behind her ear. A perfect circle, bruised black and faintly warm. She hid it under her hair, but the other women noticed. One said it looked like the slave brand her mother once spoke of, not of ownership but of binding. That evening, Silas gathered the remaining 5 in the parlor. He asked Eliza to stand before him. His voice was calm, but his eyes flickered as though watching something invisible. "You've been chosen," he said. "The house remembers you." He produced a small book, pages written in a mixture of Latin and something older. Reading aloud, he traced the mark with his fingertip until it pulsed like a heartbeat. Eliza felt something crawl under her skin, moving upward toward her skull. She screamed once, and the candles went out. When she awoke, the others were gone. Silas sat beside her, smiling faintly. "It's done," he said. "You're no longer alone." That night, Eliza heard a second voice whispering her prayers for her, speaking them an instant before she could. Eliza found the book hidden beneath the floorboard of Silas's room. The cover was wrapped in skin or something like it, and marked with the same circular symbol as her bruise. Inside were drawings of human figures sliced in half, each bound by threads of black ink. In the margins, Silas had written notes. "One soul cannot cross alone. Divide, bind, complete." Eliza read until her vision blurred. The ink seemed to shimmer, and the drawings shifted, the halves of the bodies slowly merging, forming new faces that looked almost familiar. When she closed the book, her hands were trembling. She thought she heard laughter, faint and distant, coming from the cellar below. And when she turned to leave, she found Silas standing in the doorway, watching her. He said softly, "If you read what was meant for me, then it's already begun." By mid-autumn, the plantation had grown silent. The fields lay dead. Only 2 of the 7 women remained with Eliza, Sarah, and Ruth. Both grew thin, pale, and distant. They no longer slept. One morning, Sarah was gone, her bed still warm. Her rosary lay broken across the sheets, each bead carved with a small, perfect circle. Ruth began whispering in her sleep. Eliza tried to wake her, but Ruth's eyes opened first, white, sightless, yet fixed on her. "He's building something," she said. "Something that needs all of us." That night, Ruth walked into the woods and did not return. Eliza was alone, except for Silas, and the voice beneath the house. Winter came early. The frost never melted on Hollow Acre steps. Silas called Eliza to the parlor once more. There was a white dress laid across the table, yellowed, old, and damp. He told her it belonged to his mother, but the smell of soil clung to it like a warning. He asked her to wear it. She refused. Silas's calm broke. His voice deepened, layered with another tone that didn't belong to him. "You will finish what began before you were born." Eliza woke hours later wearing the dress. Her hands were bound with silk. Silas stood before her holding a ring carved from bone. When he placed it on her finger, the lights in the house flickered. From the cellar came a deep exhale, as if the ground itself had been waiting for this moment. That night, Eliza dreamed she was buried alive, and when she tried to scream, Dirt poured from her mouth instead of air. The next morning, the mirrors were covered. Every single one. But Eliza found a shard of glass near the staircase and looked. For a heartbeat, her reflection was not her own. It was another woman, older, eyes hollow, lips sewn shut. When she blinked, the reflection smiled and mouthed something silently. "Thank you." She dropped the glass and ran to Silas's study. He was gone, but the floor was littered with sketches. 7 circles overlapping, forming one unbroken chain. Each circle bore a name. 6 she recognized. The 7th was her own. That night, she dreamed again of the cellar. Only this time the whispering stopped. The silence was worse, because silence meant something was listening. Eliza could no longer tell if it was day or night. The candles never went out. The house hummed softly, like something breathing beneath the wood. She counted the steps down to the cellar, 12. But on that night there were 13. At the bottom, she found a door she had never seen before. Behind it, 7 wooden chairs were arranged in a circle. On each sat a woman's body, still and upright, their eyes stitched closed. The 6th chair was empty. The 7th was waiting for her. When she turned to flee, she heard Silas behind her. "You can't leave," he said gently. "You're the last voice she needs." Eliza whispered, "Who?" Silas smiled. "The one who promised to wake." The door closed by itself. Weeks passed before anyone dared visit Hollow Acre. The priest from Marbury, Father Allen, arrived with 2 parish men after reports of black smoke at the edge of the valley. They found no fire, only fog that smelled like burnt honey and iron. The front door was open, but the house was silent. Dust moved in slow spirals, as if the air itself were turning in circles. On the dining table lay 7 plates, each with a small lock of hair tied neatly in a ribbon. Father Allen tried to pray, but his voice broke when he saw the words scrawled on the wall above the hearth. "Her vow is kept." He found Eliza in the parlor, or what was left of her. She sat upright, eyes open, skin gray and dry as parchment. Her hands rested gently on her lap, and between them, a wedding ring carved into her flesh. There was no sign of Silas, but in the far corner, the priest heard faint humming, 7 notes, repeated again and again, in perfect rhythm. He ordered the place sealed. That night, he burned his vestments and swore never to speak of what he saw. But his final sermon was recorded in a parish ledger. A man sought to divide the soul of love, and found only the voice of hell answering back. 10 years later, 7 children were born in Marbury County, each to a different mother. Each bore the same round mark behind the ear, dark as ink. They never met, yet when one cried, the others cried too. Their dreams were identical. A woman in a white dress whispering from behind a veil, "Wake me!" By the time they turned 13, 3 had gone missing. Their mothers claimed the air around their beds smelled like rain and soil. The church declared it superstition and ordered silence. But the records in the orphan registry show a note beside each missing child's name. Last seen heading south, toward the old plantation grounds. Locals began calling them the Circle-born. No graves were ever found. Amos Klein, the sheriff who first visited Hollow Acre years before, returned as an old man. He claimed to hear voices in his sleep, whispering his name, asking him to come back and finish what was left undone. When he arrived, the house was gone. Only the foundation stones remained, arranged in a 7-pointed ring. He stood in the center and called out. The ground beneath him shivered. From the cracks rose a smell of blood and lilac. He dropped to his knees, clutching his chest. His final words, written in his pocket journal, read, "She's still there. She never left the 7th chair." He died before sunrise. His eyes were open, but the pupils were gone, replaced with small, perfect circles of black clay. In 1899, a new church was built near the ruins. It was said to bring redemption to the land. But strange things followed the Masons. Tools vanished, stones cracked in the night, and 2 men were found buried alive beneath the foundation, their mouths packed with dirt. When the church opened, the first sermon was delivered by Father Graves, who spoke of atoning for the sins of divided spirits. He read from a text no one recognized. Witnesses claimed his voice faltered halfway through, replaced by a woman's whisper echoing his words. The congregation fled. The church bells rang for hours after he was gone. Later that week, Father Graves was found in the confessional, his throat torn open from inside. Written on the wall beside him were 7 rings overlapping, drawn in blood. In 1903, Dr. Elias Morrow, a historian from Boston, came south to document the Hollow Acre legend. He believed it was folklore, a moral warning about slavery and guilt. But in the courthouse archives, he found Silas Wren's will. It contained one curious line: "To my bride, I leave what remains unfinished. The division must complete itself." Morrow visited the site. There, he found a shard of porcelain with the name Eliza etched into it. When he held it, he heard breathing slow and steady, coming from beneath the ground. He left that night, writing in his journal, "The soil moves when I speak her name, and when I stop speaking, it whispers mine." He was never seen again. In 1922, road workers unearthed a sealed wooden box beneath what had once been Hollow Acre's cellar. Inside was a single wax recording cylinder and a brass horn phonograph. The box smelled faintly of salt and old blood. When they played the recording, they heard a woman's voice, slow, calm, reciting 7 names. Between each name came a pause, and in the background, a faint metallic scraping. At the 6th name, a second voice joined in, male, distant, repeating her words backward. Experts later confirmed the sound could not have been made by the technology of the time. The recording ended with silence, then a soft whisper, "I am awake." Every man present at the playback died within the year. One drowned in a dry riverbed, another found buried up to his neck in clay, his mouth filled with dust. The last worker was said to have burned the cylinder himself, yet witnesses swore they still heard it playing faintly whenever the wind crossed the fields. In 1936, a woman named Mara Wren was admitted to the Montgomery Asylum, claiming to be the last of the line. She bore the same circular mark behind her ear. Doctors recorded her speaking in 2 voices, one soft, one guttural. At times, she prayed. At others, she cursed in a tongue no one recognized. She refused food but asked each nurse the same question: "Do you believe a promise can survive death?" When the head physician said no, she smiled and whispered, "Then you've never been married to the earth." That night, her cell flooded with groundwater, though there were no pipes nearby. Her body was found floating, perfectly upright, her eyes open. On the wall behind her, written in the condensation, was one word: Eliza. By 1941, the legend had faded to rumor, until a fire broke out across 7 neighboring farms. Each blaze began at the same hour and burned in perfect circles, leaving the soil untouched within. In the ashes, investigators found patterns, 7 rings overlapping like the mark behind Eliza's ear. A government surveyor sent to map the land wrote in his report, "There is movement underfoot. My compass spins near the old foundation. When I say her name, the needle points down." He never returned. His map was found days later, drawn in soot, labeled only with 3 words, "The bride breathes below." In 1949, the ruins of Hollow Acre were rediscovered by accident when a storm uprooted a tree, revealing a hollow cavity beneath. Inside stood a ring of 7 wooden chairs, still intact despite the years. 6 were occupied by skeletons, hands folded neatly in their laps. The 7th chair was empty. A single gold ring lay on the seat, engraved with the initials EW, and beneath them, the faint carving of a small circle. Witnesses reported a strange vibration under the earth as they removed the chairs. One man later described hearing a heartbeat beneath his feet. Within a week, he vanished, leaving only his boots outside his home, filled with mud. Today, the site is a forest. Nothing grows where the foundation once stood. Birds avoid the trees. Their songs break into silence at the clearing's edge. Locals call it the Hollow Acre still. Children are told not to step inside the circle of soil, not because of ghosts, but because the ground breathes. After heavy rain, the earth there softens, and sometimes people find fragments. Pieces of porcelain, strands of hair, the curve of a woman's jawbone, all washed clean, as if the land is offering them back. And sometimes, when thunder rolls across Marbury County, the old folks swear they can hear a woman's voice rising beneath it, low, patient, and certain. She isn't crying. She's calling, and she is still waiting for her husband to answer.